So, reason, rage and revolution we're here to talk about, because for a long time Britain has been incredibly politically stable, and chaotic government and revolutions were the sort of things that we saw in other nations but never here. But now our society is really fiercely divided, and each tribe is rigidly certain of their moral rectitude, and they're very reluctant even to talk sometimes to their adversaries. And with the yellow vests bringing violence in France as well, this is something that's not just happening here. We seem to be edging towards instability. So how does a culture rediscover harmony when it's been so deeply divided? And is it possible that the UK could actually be closer to large-scale social unrest than we sometimes imagine? So have toleration and pluralism run their course? Can we forge a harmonious future after Brexit, if there is an after Brexit? Or are peace and stability just necessary casualties when there's so much at stake? That's what we're going to talk about today. We have Vince Cable, who, as you all know, was leader of the Liberal Democrats, coined the Bollocks to Brexit catchphrase, and I think led the Lib Dems to their highest point in the polls since the coalition. Ella Whelan, who is a political commentator at Spiked magazine and the author of What Women Want, Fun, Freedom and an End to Feminism. And Aaron Bastani, who is co-founder of Novara Media, which is a radical left-wing alternative media organisation, and he's author of Fully Automated Luxury Communism. Aaron, why don't you start?
Great. I'd want to start with a critique of the question itself, because it's premised upon an assumption that Britain has been a historically stable society. And of course, this country had a revolution, a civil war in the mid-17th century, 150 years before the French Revolution. More recently, we have the rise of Chartism, the movements for democratic suffrage during the 19th century, the suffragettes, and of course, we had a civil war, effectively, with the Republic of Ireland and its secession to the Free State only a century ago. And then more recently, of course, you've got the miners' strike, you've got Orgreave, you've got what happened with Murdoch and the press unions in the 1980s. Immense social strife. But where Mary is absolutely right is that more or less that was managed through political institutions. A lot of people were hurt, a lot of people saw their lives and their way of life decimated, but it didn't descend into the things we would normally think of as insurrection or civil war. It probably got closer than many of us think, but it didn't. Similarly, you have austerity since 2010. British Medical Journal says that there are 120 to 130,000 excess deaths which correlate with austerity. Now we can have an argument as to whether or not it caused it. We've got life expectancy falling. The average male from a working class background in Sheffield or in Glasgow lives 65 years. That's when the Tories now want to increase the pension to 70. So even within the present moment, there's a great deal of violence. If you're on low pay, if you're sick, life isn't necessarily that good. If you're in poverty as a pensioner, speaking of excess deaths, about 30,000 people die every year. They're called excess deaths by the civil service. This is people that die of the cold because of fuel poverty, and they tend to be older. But of course, because we're not interested in disrupting the status quo, nobody calls that what it is, which is effectively a form of social murder. 30,000 people is a lot. We're not talking about 10 or 20 people, and yet we do nothing about it. Why? Because it would disrupt the economic orthodoxy. And then I'll finish with this. The book I've written, Fully Automated Luxury Communism, it's a bit more pragmatic and practical than it sounds in its suggestions. It starts actually with a set of analyses which probably on this panel we agree on. I think in the 21st century we are facing several crises which I think are existential to market capitalism. Demographic ageing, very difficult to care for an ageing population with a market-based system. Climate change, that has problems with regards to geopolitics, resource scarcity, has problems with regards to mass migrations. You have automation and what that could do for unemployment. And then finally you have what I would call basically the continuation of the crisis we've seen since 2008, the global financial crisis. Today in the US, 40 million people still use food stamps. It was 26 million in 2007. People here are using food banks. Home ownership in the US is now at its lowest level since the mid-1960s. Home ownership here is its lowest level since the mid-1980s. That's only going to get worse. So I think together, that panoply of crises mean that we are going to face significant challenges to our democratic system. So either as a society, we accept the reality of those problems, and we say, you know what, we really need systems change. Or yes, I am very concerned that things would become violent. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Ella.
Perhaps we're going to be a difficult panel then, because I also want to challenge the setup of the debate, but mainly the first sentence of the blurb we talked about, the fact that for a long time Britain has been politically stable. I think we're actually really talking about the last 20, 30 years, and I'd say that rather than stable, actually it's been stagnant. It wasn't so long ago that we were having debates about the kind of crisis of apathy in politics, we're still having discussions about out-of-touch politicians, but I think that what's changed in the last 3 years, and you know what I'm talking about, the B word, though I'm not going to say bollocks to it, has meant that we've had an incredible shift, a kind of the ground stripped from underneath us, and everything has changed in British politics. And I think that that's a very good reason to have tension, to have instability, to perhaps have a running series of crises about what it is that we want British politics to do, who we want it to serve, and crucially, who should be at the centre of the power in British politics. And I want to challenge this idea of tension or instability or change being a negative thing. Actually, I think it's vital. I think we've been crying out for it for a very long time. And it's something to be potentially harnessed. We can never go back to the business as usual way of dealing with politics. The managerial, technocratic, behind closed doors nature of politics has been stripped bare, whether that be through the Brexit vote or through, more importantly, the crushing of it by the political elites. We've had what someone I know has called, and I think it's true, the first stage of the Brexit revolution, in which we have had politicians laid bare for the views that they hold. We've had called into question the nature of our voting system, the sustainability of the House of Lords, the monarchy. We've opened up a huge amount of questions about what it is that British democracy is, and actually I think we've been found wanting. It's been found wanting, and to say we're in incredibly unsatisfactory times for the position of voters and ordinary people's political power is an understatement. So I think that the second stage of the revolution, which might be where we start talking about the nature of unrest, metaphorical or otherwise, I'm actually heartened by the protests happening in Paris and across France, because I think that it shows that there is very much still a willingness of ordinary people to stand up for the things that they believe in, to challenge their rulers, and to potentially open up a space where we can have a discussion about what it is society should believe in and what it is that politics, what shape politics should take. So I kind of challenge you to leave aside any remaining cling that you've got to the status quo, any desire to wind back time, whether that's through revoking Article 50 or through other aspects of politics, and face the perhaps uncomfortable fact for some of you is that British politics is changing and the people who are in charge of British politics is changing. And I think that's a very, very good thing.
Vince.
Yes, I just want to address the particular question about whether Britain is now in a dangerously unstable position and facing threat of violence. And I want to stir up a bit of complacency. I mean, I've been endlessly involved in arguments with people on the other side of the political side from me who tell me that if we have another vote on Brexit, we couldn't possibly do it because there would be massive eruption of civil violence and, quote, civil war. Theresa May using that kind of rhetoric and her successors. And I just think that is just utter nonsense. I think one of the reasons is we're confusing private and public anger. I mean, my dad was a very right-wing working-class conservative who would now be in the Brexit Party. And you know, whenever President Nasser or Jomo Kenyatta was mentioned on the radio, he would sling his shoes at it or take it out on my mother. But you know, once he stepped out of the front door, he was a model citizen. And I think there is, we're confusing these two things. And if you look at the demography of the present kind of Brexit populism in Britain, it isn't leading the way to kind of revolutionary violent change. There are two reasons. First of all, if you look at the poorest cities in Britain, contrary to the narrative about austerity and so on, the poorest cities in Britain actually voted to remain. You know, Glasgow, Dundee, Belfast, Newcastle, Liverpool, maybe Manchester, though not, they're richer. And more crucially, it was about age. There are many correlates with voting patterns, but the overwhelming factor was age.
For more debates, talks and interviews, subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas at IAI TV.